To the Overcoming Adversity podcast. I'm your host, Michael Allison. You know that today's guest is John Callas. He's an author, he's a writer, producer. But this man has been through his own fair share of adversities. And when I tell you from childhood trauma all the way through an adult to the point of even trying to commit suicide, he's here to tell us about his story and how he overcame adversity. I can't wait to get into this conversation. Hey, John, welcome to the Overcoming Adversity podcast show, man. Thank you for being here, brother.
My pleasure, Michael. Thank you. And just so you hear it from me, thank you for your service as a Marine.
Absolutely, man. I appreciate that, man. Coming from you, thank you, man. I appreciate it.
Pleasure.
So, when I was thinking about your story, it it immediately brought me back to some of my situations that I've been through with childhood trauma and suicide, and it resonated with me to hear your story and learn about your book of how you've overcame so many things and you could have easily given up on yourself. If you can, tell us a little bit about your story and how you got to this level of still being here today to talk about your story, man.
Sure. When I was 3 years old, my dad died. And at that moment, I felt very abandoned and lost in the world. Slipped into trauma, depression. I gave up on religion and God. I thought the world hated me and I hated it. I started acting out so badly that by the time I was 12 years old, the courts gave my mother and then my stepdad a choice of either sending me to military school or reform school. So I went to military school and it didn't get any better there. I was abused, beat, sexually harassed. And on the third year, I told my parents if they sent me away again, I was going to jump off the train and they would never see me again. So they sent me to a private school where the abuse and bullying continued to the point at 15 years old, I decided enough of the noise. I couldn't handle it anymore. And I walked to the edge of a dock of a partially frozen lake and jumped in. And basically, when I was down under the water, something grabbed me and just said, I don't want to die. There's got to be something better to life than this. And I climbed out, and that's what kind of began the journey to recovery.
Wow. Wow. So let's go back a little bit, man. So at such a young age, your dad passed away.
Yeah.
If you could tell us a little bit about your dad, of what you could remember, and then what was that like for you, man, to go through that growing up, knowing that your real dad is not there? Because it sounds like some of those things attributed to your daily processing, your connecting, and things that was going on in your life, and may be part of why things were. You said you were kind of acting out and stuff like that.
Sure. Um, Losing a father at any age is difficult, but at 3 years old, you kind of lose your hero. You don't really have a sense of masculinity or how you fit in the world. And as you grow up and older, kids around you are saying, I'm going to the ballpark with my dad. What are you doing this weekend? And so I started lying, saying, oh, well, we're going to the ballpark too. We're going to go see the Yankees and all this other kind of stuff. And um, my mother was pregnant with a fourth kid and miscarried at the funeral. And we lived in a very impoverished neighborhood, didn't have much food or uh, money at all. And she started working her butt off to get us out of there into a middle America kind of environment. The depression got so bad after my dad died that I was scared to go to sleep because I would always find myself falling in this spiral. And I would wake up in a dreadful sweat. And I would cry for endless hours because I was so scared to go back to school. I'm sorry, go back to sleep. And it was hard to be around people that had a father and I didn't. And I think a lot of that contributed to my outreach of uh, bad behavior and involvement with the police, always getting into fights. It never ended. It was just too painful for me to deal with.
I want to follow up because knowing that your dad died, right? But now your mom is dealing with the death of her husband. inside of that environment within that household, knowing that, let's say your dad was the one that was providing initially for you guys, and now more responsibilities shift onto her. Did that have any impact that took place within your household? Because you also mentioned that there was more kids within the household as well.
Yeah, I had a brother and sister. I had a brother and sister. My sister passed away a couple of years ago.
Hmm.
But in that environment, from what I'm remembering, my mother would put food on the table, and I always looked at her and said, "Mom, why aren't you eating?" And she goes, "Oh, I ate at work." And it wasn't until years later I found out she didn't eat at work. She was hungry as hell,
Oh my
but
God.
we just didn't have enough food on the table. And she tried to keep the environment as best she could. There was not a lot of support. We didn't have a lot of other family members around us, and she would go out to work, and we would have either a neighbor or an aunt, if they lived by, come and kind of keep an eye on us. But we were left out, and I went out on the streets, and that's where I was growing up, is out on the street. And my guidance was the bad kids I wound up hanging out with, and that was setting me into a really ugly course in life.
Wow. So let's touch on that a little bit. If you can tell us what were some of the things that you were getting into, because you mentioned that you had run-ins with the law at such a young age. I grew up in Miami, Florida, and I see a lot of bad things in the projects and the ghettos that we grew up in. And your stories, that's what I'll tell you, it sticks out because I used to see kids at that age, and the police would hover around our neighborhood because they knew kids were getting in trouble. Can you tell us a little about that?
Sure. As I began growing a little older than three, because eventually they let me out of the house. At 3 years old, they weren't going to do that too
Right.
quickly. But there was a junkyard in our neighborhood, and I found this old beat up guitar, no strings on it. And of course, at that point, I thought I was a rock musician, right? And my brother and I went to our local candy store, and this kid started harassing my brother. And even the guy that owned the store said, "Why don't you knock it off?" And the kid just kept going at him. So I snuck up behind him and wound up, and I whacked him upside the head with the guitar and broke it over his head.
Holy
And
smokes.
and the shop owner said, "You kids better get out of here because the cops going to be here."
Wow.
So we ran like hell, of course. That was my first encounter with the cops knocking on the door saying, "Yeah, we got to talk to you about your son."
Oh my God. All
Uh,
right. So your parents, I assume step parents now at the time, sent you off to military school. Why did they send you to military school, and what was that experience like?
Well, as I mentioned, the courts gave her a choice, either military school or reform school, and there was really no other choice because back in that day, there was not a lot of mental health experts that could help. She certainly didn't have the money. She didn't have the time to deal with my issues, and she had no sense of mental health at all to help us. And at that point in time, it was, kids are seen and not heard. Suck it up. You're a man. You're not supposed to cry.
Right.
And, all the messages we falsely got, which later on, she and I talked about and came to terms with. But um, she was tough. She had no choice. I mean, she had three kids, and she couldn't be the nurturing mother that I wanted. She had to be the mother, father, provider, disciplinarian, and guide. And she did the best she could, but it fell short because she didn't have help. And this
Wow.
was before she met my stepdad, and that didn't happen until I was 12. So at 12, my mother took me from New Jersey, drove me to New York City, and put me on a train alone to go from New York to Virginia. And I'm looking at her. The train starts pulling out. She turns away and walks away. And again, I felt so abandoned. I said, "She doesn't love me. She's walking away from me. I'm in pain here. I'm scared to death. I don't know what the heck I'm doing." And she's walking away. And it wasn't until many years later, when I was an adult, that she told me the truth of that moment wasn't that she abandoned me. She turned away because she was crying that she was putting her 12-year-old baby on a train and had no choice. And that was one of the toughest decisions she made. And on my behalf was probably the best decision because I was out of control. The military experience was 3 years of a nightmare. I mean, before I even got to Washington, D.C., where we changed trains, I was already in two fistfights with some of the cadets. One of the cadets said, "You know anything about MST, which stands for Military Science Training?" And I said, "I don't need to know about whatever you call it to stomp ass." Again, a wise ass with my mouth. And look, arguably, I had a mouth on me. There was no question. But growing up in a ghetto, either you had a mouth and stood up for yourself, or you were going to get the crap beat out of you.
Right.
And so this kid said, "What are you, a punk?" And I punched him in the face. And we went at it, and the conductor had to separate us. My first,
So go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
so when I got to the school, my first night there, I literally got knocked out 3 times because of my mouth.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it was not a
So
good thing.
I could imagine, man. I could imagine. I could also imagine as a kid and that moment of departure and me reflecting on like my entire life is kind of like flashing in front of me. And at this moment, my mom just sent me on this train. Did you carry that moment of abandonment, depression, and all of those things? Because I could see that you acted out while you were there, right? But did you carry that resentment in regards to any form of hostility against your parents?
Absolutely. I, at that moment, felt like I didn't have a family anymore. I basically said F you to them. And look, as I was growing older, they would say, "You coming home for Thanksgiving and Christmas?" I said, "No, why should I? You guys don't love me." And they said, "Come on, we do too." And I said, "I'm not coming home." And I remember distinctly one Christmas when I was living in Venice, she called me on Christmas Day and said, "How are you?" I said, "I'm fine. How are you?" I wasn't very friendly. And she goes, "Are you eating a dinner?" I said, "Yeah, I'm making a steak, baked potato, and vegetables." And she goes, "You're really hungry, aren't you?" I said, "No, I'm fine." What was on the stove was boiling rice, and I had 1 carrot that I could afford. And that was it. But I was so angry and so venomous towards my family that I wanted nothing to do with them at all. And hindsight later on in my life, I look back and saw all of the missed memories and all of the missed holidays that I could have spent with them. And it took me a long time to wake up to understand. People kept saying, "Well, you got to forgive them. You got to forgive them." And all the people that hurt you in your life. And eventually woke up one morning and said, "No, I don't have to forgive anybody. I need to forgive myself for the things that I chose to do and
Yeah,
take responsibility for it."
yeah, absolutely. You know, you mentioned to us that you went to this military school and the experience was not the best. And I could imagine that at that young age and maybe a bit of rebellious, right? There's things that could take place. And I thought about some of the things that you shared in regards to like when I was in the Boy Scouts. So if
Mm.
you can talk a little bit about what was that experience like once you got there, because you were there for 3 years. Did anything happen to you or did you learn any lessons while you were there?
It's an interesting idea to talk about. I'd like to say that there were kids at the military school that were gun ho military. They wanted to make their lives military people, and they absolutely loved it. And I
Hmm.
was just baffled by it. I said, "How can you love this? It's so." I mean, for example, the first day I go out to stand in line at 6 o'clock in the morning and salute as the flag goes up. Nobody told me the rules. Nobody told me
Right.
what I was supposed to do, not supposed to do. So they said, "Present arms." So I went like this. I stuck both my arms out. Needless to say, the captain saw that and wasn't happy. Hell did I know about present arms?
That was a good one.
And that was the beginning of it, Michael.
Knowing that I served the Marine Corps and just it just flashed through my mind, man. Like if somebody was to do that in the Marine Corps, what the hell would happen to them, man?
They get the crap beat out of them. You stick your hands out. No, you're supposed to be saluting to the flag. I didn't
Oh
know.
my god! Oh
And
my
then as soon as the bugler finished the raising of the flag, they always shot a cannon off. So the first time it went off, I said, "What the hell was that?" Now you're not supposed to talk when you're in ranks. And that was the second dirty look I got from the captain. Um, Needless to say, they took me and beat the crap out of me for that. It was not a good experience. Now, you asked me, did I learn anything?
Yeah.
Let's be honest here. I learned eventually, and it took me a couple years to get this headspace, that I needed to play the game. Otherwise, I was not going to survive this. Because my first year there, I set an academy record of how many demerits a student could get. And each demerit meant 1 hour of no free time. So we either marched or had an exercise. And about 6 months of this, I thought, no, this doesn't work for me. I mean, I kept running away from school. They kept dragging me back and beating me for going AWOL, absent without leave for your audience who don't know military terms. And it just got too painful. So I started waking up to having to play their game. So I wasn't going to let them break me,
Yeah.
but I let them guide me into what I could and couldn't do to stay out of trouble. And it later on in life, it was interesting because when I needed to have discipline, that military mindset kicked in, and I knew how to discipline myself, not under their rules, but under the guidance they offered and instilled in me. So, yeah, there was sort of like a silver lining in it, even through the worst things in the world. One of the other silver lining was the beginning of somebody who actually took an interest in me. There was a cook, an African American guy named Otis. And my first couple of days there, I was walking down the path with the boatload of all the uniforms in my arms. And Otis came out and he said, "Hey, kid, how you doing?" So I put the stuff down and I said, "Not good." And he said, "First year?" I said, "Yep." He says, "Don't let them make you the example." I said, "I think it's a little late on that one." And I told him what was happening. And every time I saw him, he would throw me an apple or something. We got to talking, and he encouraged me to keep it narrow. Don't get in their face because they'll win. You can't beat them at this game. You will lose. And so we became friends basically. And my third year, I went to see him, and one of the other chefs came out and said, "Hey, here's a letter from Otis." I said, "Where's Otis?" And he just looked down. He knew it was going to hurt me. And he said, "Otis passed away."
Wow.
And in the note, I'll paraphrase the note. He said, "John, you're a good kid. I see the love in your heart. Don't let them break you. Go find yourself. You can do it." And it was an encouraging letter from a man that had no reason to take me under his wing or even care about me. And it touched me really deeply. I mean, I went home back to my barracks. I must have cried for 3 straight hours because I love this man because it was the first male figure in a sense that
Right.
cared
Right.
about
Right.
me,
Right.
and it screwed me pretty badly. Now, another good thing that happened once I kind of started figuring out things. One day I had my M1 rifle, and I was twirling it around, trying to figure out, just some fun stuff outside the barracks. And this guy comes up to me and goes, "You're pretty good with that. How'd you learn that?" I said, "I don't know. I just was playing with it." I said, "Who are you?" And he said, "I'm in charge of the drill team." I said, "Okay." He says, "You want to be on the drill team?" And I looked at him and said, "What does that mean?" He goes, "Well, that means you get out of all of you." As soon as he said get out of everything, I said, "I'll join." So I didn't have to do any of the junk that I had to do normally because I was on the drill team. So he drilled me, drilled me, drilled me. And then we went into the entire academy, had a competition who was the best drill cadet in school. And I was in the junior school, so nobody ever won from the junior school because you got all these seniors that are
Right.
like just practice for years. Well, I was the fourth best drill cadet in the entire school because I was
Wow.
determined to get that.
Wow.
And then as a result, the captain of my little uh, company came to me and said, "I'm assigning you your own squad." I said, "Oh, why? I don't want that." It turned out to be most of the football players.
Hmm.
And I thought, "Oh, great. Here comes the." So I pulled them into a meeting and I said, "I'm your leader." And they all went, "Uh huh." I said, "I'm going to be straight with you guys." I said, "What?" I said, "I really don't give a shit about what you do. I'm not going to sit here and try and guide you and make you shine your shoes and all that. I don't give a crap. I know I'm going down the tubes because you're my team now. So do whatever you want. I'm out of here." They looked at each other as I was walking out. I heard them laughing. Next morning, I come out. They're all standing in attention, perfect uniform, shine shoes, and all that. And I looked at them and said, "What's this about?" They said, We like you. We like you didn't give a shit about it. We had some of the rats shine our shoes and make sure we look good for you. I went, okay. I still don't give a shit, but okay, thanks. You know. So there were a couple of moments that were fun.
Good, good, good. I want to ask you a couple of things here, man. That you mentioned earlier, and I think it's important to see the other side of the situation.
Sure.
You were on the brinks of attempting suicide. You went down inside of that bottom of the water. You came back out, and you made a decision in your life, man, that you're going to choose to live. Can you talk a little bit about choosing to live, and if you can, take a look back at that situation and just give some perspective as you think about that now today?
Okay, I'm going to give it to you from the adult, not the little boy that was going through it at the moment. Looking back at it, I had pretty much given up on life. No friends and all this. And when I went to that private school before I committed suicide, there was a 6'2" guy that decided that because I went to military school, I should be able to kill him and beat him up and stuff. And I said, "Look, I'm into peace, because I had discovered the Beatles and the peace movement, and all this." And I said, "I don't want any problems." And he harassed me for 3 years. And after the incident with the attempted suicide, the soccer coach came down and talked to me. He says, "Hey, how come you don't play any sports?" And I said, "It's not my thing." He goes, "Well, didn't your dad teach you anything?" And I put my head down. He said, "All right, what's the story?" And I told him. And he said, "How about I teach you how to play soccer?" I said, "Why would you do that?" He says, "Because I need soccer players. I've got a small school, and you seem like you could be pretty good as a defenseman." So he took me under his wing and taught me soccer. And the harassing continued, but my chemistry teacher found out that I was a pretty good soccer player and came to me and said, "You want to get an A in chemistry?" I said, "Okay, what's up?" He goes, "You have to join my wrestling team." I said, "Oh, gosh." I said, "Okay, fine." And then the hockey coach did the same thing because he saw me skating one day. So there I am with three sports events now with different coaches. The third year, during the nomination for captain and co-captain of the soccer team, my name came up. And this kid stood up and said, "No, we don't want him. He won't even stand up for himself." And something, Michael, snapped in my head. And I said, "Anytime, anywhere." He says, "Right now." So I ran up to him. He punched me, knocked me down, punched me, knocked me down, punched me, knocked me down. And then I lost my adrenaline, came up, and I kicked him square where it hurt. He fell down. I jumped on top of him. And because of my wrestling, I pinned him on the ground and started digging my fingers behind his ears. He started bleeding. I was going to kill the kid. The whole team had to pull me off because they knew I was dead serious. And so I walked off the field, and the coach came down and he said, "You got to come back to the field." I said, "No, I almost killed this kid. I've been warning the headmaster and everyone that if I lose my temper, I know what I'm capable of, and I don't want to lose my temper." He goes, "Yeah, but the whole team, including him, nominated you as co captain." And I looked at him and I said, "Coach, that's really sick." He said, "I don't understand. You just got what you wanted." I said, "No, what's sick is that it took me to be physically violent to win respect.
Wow.
That's not a world I want to live in." And he put his arm around me and said, "I'm really proud of you. Not many people have that perspective in life." So I went back, and sure enough, that night he tried to stand in the way in the cafeteria, which he always did. And he saw me make a fist because I was just going to go at him. And he stood out of the way, and the place all stood up, applauding and screaming and all that. And I really, Michael, I really thought the world was crazy. I said, if this is what it takes to be respected, this is not the place I want to be. I've got to figure out something else. And that was some of the moments where I started the paradigm of my shift. But what I found interesting is I found an outlet for all of my anger: sports. I could be as aggressive, mean, nasty piece of work that I had no boundaries whatsoever. My coach in hockey, when I left, took the team and gathered around and said, "You all have ever watched Callas play? We're losing him because he's a senior." And I said, "What do you mean?" And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "There are two things that can get by him: a puck and a man. I've never seen both get by him. And I've knocked people into the stands." It was a place I could get rid of all my violence, all my anger, all my frustration. And I knocked the snot out of people. I became undefeated in wrestling because I could throw people around like a rag doll. And it just, it gave me some relief. Although I still thought the world was crazy.
So, John, hearing your story, man, it's super, super, super profound. But you took it a step further, man. You chose to put it in a book. Can you tell us a little bit about your book, man?
Sure. It's got two voices in it. I started writing this book because the therapist had asked me to put a couple of pages together. And when he read it and saw me the next time, he hugged me and said, I don't know how you got through life. And so I just kept writing it. And this book took 50 years to write. And it's the journey of a little boy's perspective of what he thought was the truth, starting in a ghetto all the way through being a Hollywood director, writer, and a producer, very successful, including an Emmy nomination. And the other voice in it was the adult looking back and saying what the real truth was, not what the little boy's perception of the truth was. And I wanted to write this book to help others on their journey. And there's been so many people reaching out saying, I've had this similar experience. I'm so glad you wrote this. One of the reviewers on the book read it with his wife over the weekend, and his wife wrote me an email saying, Hey, after we read your book, he went over to the phone, picked it up, and called his mother, who he hadn't spoken to in 10 years, and she's now back in his life, and I want to thank you. And other people would reach out and say, I tried suicide too, and I'm so glad you're so open to talk about it. And I've had people call me, because my number's on my website, and I've spoken to them. I went yesterday with a young lady who wanted to know more about my background and help her in learning how to write and all that. And we got into the whole mental health aspect. And she goes, You really are brave to say this. I said, Men were never taught to speak about their feelings. And I'm trying to get men to understand it's okay to have feelings and it's okay to talk about it. And the more we talk about it, the more we can learn and come out of it and head towards recovery.
Wow. So, I love the fact that mental health is such an important thing for you, man. And I think you're exactly right. When it comes to being vulnerable and transparent, that's some things as men we're kind of told to kind of mask when it comes to like man up, being macho, and those types of things.
Mhm.
But the true hero in that is what you just said, is actually speaking up for yourself, getting the help that you need. And for you to be a champion of that, man, can you tell us a little bit about the journey and the path that you're on in regards to being a mental health advocate?
Sure. I joined an organization called Magnify Your Message because I wanted to join it to sell books. And what they did is they refocused me. It wasn't about selling books, but it was about the message I had written about. And they took me from an experiential mental health expert and developed my whole core message and how I was to present myself. And I wound up on major media, over 575 million views on my material that I had out in the world. And they guided me very strong. And I did pitches for news broadcasts. I was on a couple of TV shows and so on and so forth. And yeah, they're an incredible organization. So that's what started me evaluating my worth in helping people in the mental health area. Now, I tell people when they call me and want me to work with them, I say, understand, I am not a licensed practitioner. So I cannot give you answers to your problems or anything. I can give you advice. We can talk about how you have to help yourself. And I came up with a process called uncover, discover, and recover. You uncover the current situation you're having difficulty with. You discover whether or not the truth of that view of what you think is happening is true, or is there something else? And once you understand it, then you need to take the necessary steps to move forward in your recovery.
Absolutely. I love it, man. Speaking of recovery, obviously you've made a transformation, man. Can you tell us a little bit of how about how important it is when it comes to the word forgiveness, either for yourself or for the other people? I already know you already know the answer, but if you can explain to our listeners, man, how important that is, man.
For forgiveness,
Yes, sir.
I don't think you can forgive others until you forgive yourself. Because in forgiving yourself, you empower yourself to understand that the reason your life is the way it is because you made those decisions to have it that way. Once you forgive yourself, you can start changing it. Take it out as a blank piece of paper and say, okay, what do I want my life to look like? And write it on that paper. And then understand where you are in that process and start going after it one step at a time. Um, just because you're your first day on the set, you're carrying coolers, doesn't mean the second day you're going to be a director. But if that's what you want to be, you learn by keeping your mouth shut, your eyes and ears open. That's a good military term, by the way. First thing they tell you, keep your ears and eyes open, your mouth shut, and open the cigarettes. So that was a lesson I learned, and that's what I kind of based my whole life on after that is understanding my responsibility in everything that happened to me, and anything I look around and saw in the world was because I created it that way. And I decided some aspects of it I didn't like, so I got rid of it, I purged it, and changed it to something more positive.
Can you share with our audience how important it is to have certain types of boundaries and also share with our audience like your level of tolerance now when it comes to adversities that's in your life?
Sure. Boundaries are some of the most important things you'll ever have in your life. My first marriage ended after 7 months because I didn't have a sense of what I was doing because I just was in love with the concept of being married. And when when I started dating a whole bunch of women and stuff, and it just wasn't working, I was brushing my teeth one night, and I thought to myself, "What's the common denominator here? There can't be all these women." And I realized it was the guy brushing his teeth in the mirror. And so I had to start thinking about I was out looking for what they could give me, and it was the wrong focus. I had to find the boundary of what I was willing to give to a relationship. Once I understand my value and understood what I could give, I didn't have to put on any airs, anything. Every woman I ever dated after that knew exactly what they were getting because I was open, honest, and very much a boundary kind of driven person. If you tell me to change my personality to fit your life, goodbye. If you say this habit, I'll make something up, of spitting in the streets is really disgusting, would you stop it? I will say, I love you enough. It'll take me some time, but I will stop that because you're right, it is disgusting and I can work with that. So, understanding your boundaries is really critical to self worth and understanding not to be taken advantage of. And if you find a situation where you feel you've been taken advantage of, look back and see how you participated in it, not why the other person was a jerk. And soon you'll start learning very quickly you have to set boundaries with friends, with wife, with yourself.
As you got on this road to recovery and transformation, can you talk a little bit about who were some impactful people that helped you? Were there mentors? Were there coaches? Were there certain types of books? Was there a podcast? Who was some influential people that helped you along your journey, man?
Okay. Besides the three coaches I mentioned, when I
Mhm.
got to college, I started college as a chemistry major because I wanted to cure cancer because that's what my dad died of. And after a while, the chemistry teacher took me for a walk and said, "Why do you want to be a chemist?" And so he got the story out of me. I said, "Why?" He goes, "Well, you do 3 hour labs in 45 minutes and they're perfect. All of your tests, you get straight A's. You're really good at this." I said, "Oh, great." He goes, "But you're not a chemist. You're not the guy with the pocket thing with the pens. It's not you." I said, "But I want to do it for cancer." He said, "It's wrong. And I've already talked to the academic admissions, and you're no longer in my class." I said, "What? You just told me I was a good student." He goes, "Yeah, but John, I'm going to tell you something you need to listen to. This is not your field. You're an artist. There's an art in you, and you need to find yourself." So I sat on the grass, and my African American friend Liz comes up and she goes, "What's happened?" And I said, told her about the chemist, and she goes, "I thought you were an A student." I said, "I am, but that's what he told me." She goes, "Well, can you help me today?" I said, "Sure, Liz." Now I'm thinking she wants me to help her move furniture or something, right? She takes me to the theater, and I said, "What am I doing here?" She goes, "I need somebody to read the lines." I said, "I'm not an actor." She goes, "Just read the lines." And so I got on stage. I started reading the lines that, she gave me the script. And the director said, "Okay, now do this." And I did that. And he said, "Oh, really good." And about an hour in, I said, "Hey, listen, I got to go. I got to go do my homework." The director says, "You can't leave a rehearsal." And I looked at Liz. I said, She had this Cheshire smile on her face, right? And he goes, "Yeah, you got the lead in in the play." I said, "Oh no." You know, at the end of the rehearsal, the whole cast came around and said, "God, that's really good. We're really happy to have you here." And it just all of a sudden felt like someplace I belonged. And the second year, I wound up writing and directing a play for Parent Teacher Weekend. And it just got in my blood after that. And that chemistry teacher saw it. My art teacher, during the same period, saw the same thing. And we had an assignment where we had to go pick something out of nature, and I couldn't find anything. And I was walking along the railroad tracks, and I saw a broken toilet. And I said, "Oh, that's symbolic." So I took it back to my dorm and I put dirt in it and put flour in it and covered it up and brought it to class. So when I uncovered it, the teacher looked and he said, "Now this is really good art." And I'm thinking, "Oh boy, he's going to slam me." So I know he is. He goes, "It's like he's saying that, you know, where you go to the bathroom and what comes out of you doesn't have to be about your life. You can still spring flowers from it."
Hmm.
And I thought, wow, somebody just called me an artist. So he was pretty monumental in pushing me in that direction too. Um, and it just seemed when Michael, when I look back, there were so many mentors that kept pushing me towards being an artist, and I never realized it. But somehow I just flowed with where I was going. And uh, mentors are very important to your life.
Absolutely. So before we wrap up and get out of here, man, speaking of your last story and discovering what you truly should have been, which is what you do now, man. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the things that you've done, some of your accomplishment? Because it's truly amazing. I've checked out some of the things that you've done, but it's truly amazing to hear your story, which is why I didn't want to even talk about that first until towards the end. But you came from such a deep, dark past where you could have given up on yourself, but you didn't do that, to now being Emmy nominated, super successful, and here to tell us about your story, man. Can you brag about yourself a little bit, man?
It's hard for me to do that, Michael, but I am just not that kind of guy. But I started out on a set where I was thinking I was getting thrown off from a friend of mine bringing me onto the set. And it turned out to be a special effects guy who took me under his wing, and I started doing special effects. And then I got into other departments. And then the bottom dropped out. I couldn't get a job to save my life. So I became a counsel and employment agency. I built a brick wall on Sunset Boulevard. I became a waiter. And then a production manager came in and offered me a prop master job. So what I'm trying to say is I didn't just jump in as a successful director, writer, producer. I started at the very, very bottom. I had no contacts whatsoever. I had no nepotism, no family members that could give me any help at all. So my parents said, "You should pick a different field. You know, it's really impossible to get in." And when I heard that, I said, "This is what I want to do. Impossible or not, I'm going to find a way." And there were a lot of nights where I would fall on my bed crying, thinking I was a complete failure. But the next morning, I got up, took my stack of resumes, drove around because we didn't have the internet, we didn't have cell phones,
Right.
you know, none of that nonsense. Knocking on doors. I made fortune cookies with my resume in them. I mean, I did all sorts of crazy crap to do to get attention. I literally went down to Chinatown and had them put my resume in it, and with a little thing sticking out that said, "You don't hire John Callas, you die." You know, a lot of people were thinking that was really clever, and so I started getting a reputation that uh, this guy can figure out anything. So eventually, I started a company, and a guy named Anthony Goldschmidt, who passed away unfortunately, took me in, and I became his sole production company. So one of my favorite moments was when I was asked to do the production for the TriStar logo with the horse. You know,
Hmm. Yeah.
at that point, the CGI wasn't it. So the head of Sony TriStar looked at me and said, "So who's the jerk who's going to do this?" And I thought, he's kicking me under the table because he knew I had very low tolerance to BS. I said, "That jerk would be me, sir." And he said, "You see this painting?" I said, "Yes, sir." He goes, "I want everything in this real. I don't want anything fake. Nothing is fake." Now, this is all senior executives for TriStar, so many pictures. He says, "How are you going to do it?" And I looked and I said, "Well, I think I better start finding a flying horse. And the place cracked up. I mean, he said, all right, wise guy. Besides the flying horse, he said, well, you wanted it all real. Like, you got to find a flying horse for you. I, and he said, so how are you going to do it? And I said, truthfully, what you just presented is something extremely complex. And the answer is, I don't know. I'm not going to sit here and BS you. I don't know. But I will find out how to do it, and you will know. And he goes, I like your honesty. So we got the job, and I did that. One of my other things that I did was the Styx concert tour. Uh, we had been tasked with shooting a live concert with film, not digital, where everything's made in heaven. The picture and audio are matched already. This we had to do film with an audio track. So I had to figure out how to do that without having a clapper, which is how you sync up film and
Mhm.
audio. And at the same time, Martin Scorsese did The Last Waltz. He was trying to figure out the same technology. So we were neck and neck coming down the road, and we both kind of figured it out. And uh, that was a really exciting moment. We shot over 1 million feet of film. Uh,
Wow.
and then my reputation just exploded as the guy. If you can't figure something out, call him. He's not going to be cheap again. So a company called me and said, "We got a problem with something. I need to talk to you about." I said, "What's that?" And they said, "We wanted to marry live action with animation." I said, "Let me guess. You shot the animation first, didn't you?" They said, "Yeah." And they said, "Is there any way to fix that?" I said, "Yes, there is. And this is what it's going to cost you." And they said, "Fine." After that, the owner of the company called and said, "My editors want to kiss you. Everything lines up perfectly. The eye lines are great. It's working great. We want you to do a couple more shows for us." I said, "Okay." Well, a couple more shows turned into 80 episodes of Bobby's World with Howie Mandel, which is what got me my Emmy nomination.
That's one of
And
my favorite shows, man.
yeah, he was a very cool guy to work with, you know. So I did MTV. I won the second annual award for Best Concept of the Year. I produced the Smuggler's Blues with Glenn Fry.
Hmm.
And then Glenn Fry and I got to know each other because one day I'm on the soccer field as a coach for AYSO, and he comes walking across the field. I said, "Glenn?" He goes, "John?" I said, "What are you doing here?" He goes, "What are you doing here?" I said, I'm coach." He goes, "You see that kid there?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "That's my kid. I'll see you later." I said, "Where you going?" He goes, "I got to write a song." I said, "Well, if I'm taking care of your kid, I get 10%, right?" He looks at me and goes, "No," and turns away. I would love to have known what song he was writing. But
Man,
so,
that is awesome, man.
yeah, and I got to work with a lot of A-list talent that, you don't get exposed to quite often. But Michael, I think what made it comfortable for them and me is I only looked at them like human beings. I never got starstruck except one time, which if you want, I'll tell you the funny story.
Tell
But
me.
okay, so I always looked at them and treated them just like you and I are talking. And then I didn't have any of the starstruck crap in my head. But I was working on Raging Bull, and to
Mm,
me, De Niro, it's
De
like
Niro,
I'm
yeah.
not worthy. But even still, I still said he's still a guy, right? So somebody said, "Hey, Callas, go take this envelope to De Niro. He's in the practice ring across the street." I said, "Okay." And he said, "Wait for an answer." I said, "Okay." So I hold up the envelope, and De Niro waves his glove, meaning he'll come out. So once he finishes practicing, he takes off his glove, he sticks out his hand and says, "Hi, what's your name?" I'm shaking his hand. I go, "Robert De Niro." And he looks at me and goes, "No, that's my name." I tell you, I almost did it in my pants, Michael. I turned, I pushed that way, I started walking out. He goes, "Don't you need an answer?" I said, "Yeah, sure. Okay, I'll wait." And what was really cool, Michael, is at that moment he could have made me feel really tiny, but he
Yeah.
was a gentleman. He smiled and he said, "Yeah, it was nice to meet you, John." I said, "It was nice to meet you, Robert." He says, "You work in the show?" I said, "Yeah, I'm one of the guys under the UPM." He goes, "Well, I'll see you in the ring." I said, "Okay, have a good day." And I ran out. I sat down on the curb because I was about to vomit.
Man, that's a
So
great story, man.
yeah, he was a gentleman, and same with Mel Gibson, Mel Brooks, all of the people I got to work with. They all treated us as professionals, and they were
Wow.
there to do a job.
Wow, 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 wow. All right, John, looking ahead, man. As our listeners could hear, man, you've accomplished a lot, man. What is next for you, man, when it comes to like some more goals and aspirations, man? What's next for you, brother?
All right. Well, I have a producer in Atlanta that's working with me on. We have a budget, a script. We ran through an analysis with a company. They said this is a very sellable story. It's based on a novel I wrote called Christmas Voices, and it's fully packaged, and we're now seeking investments for it, investors for it. We have a couple of really strong leads. We might shoot it in Georgia because they have a really good tax incentive program.
Uh-huh.
That's been a passion project. My wife and I started building little villages in 1990,
Uh-huh.
and it was all based on Charles Dickens' village porcelain that Department 56 had. Well, I got such a bug that by the time 10, 15 years later, I had built a platform that was 5.5 feet wide and 22 feet long in our living room. And it's got all hand carved mountains, trains, little things, snow. I created lighting gags. There are over 800 trees on the platform. You can go to YouTube and search Callas 2022 Christmas Village, and there's a 30-second clip. And
Uh-huh.
you can also look at Callas time lapse Christmas Village, and that shows 60 hours of me filming us building the village, compressed into about 9 or 10 minutes, and it's like goes really fast and stuff. So that you can see the level it takes. It takes us 9 weeks to build this village.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it's crazy. And if you look underneath the platform, every building, every train wire is under there, and I've got to wire all this. If the fire department ever came by, we would be shut down for sure because it's like 9 plugs in one circuit.
But that's impressive still though, man. Wow.
Well, you can't jump into it at that scale. I mean, we're considered one of the largest model builders at that scale in the
Hmm.
world. We had to start out with small and put a couple of more pieces together, and then it expanded on the floor. Then we put it on a 4x8 piece of plywood, and then two 4x8s, and eventually I just said, no, I need bigger because I want the train to make a loop. And then she said, "You're crazy. You're really crazy. You've lost it." I said, "This is your fault, not mine."
Hey man, I wish you nothing but success on the movie, man. I can't wait for it to actually go into production, come out on screen, so I could get an invite to see it. So man,
Absolutely,
I wish you nothing
absolutely.
but success on that, man. Before we wrap up and get out of here, man, if you could share with us some key takeaways in regards to some life lessons that our listeners could take and just start applying to their lives today, man, because your story is truly, truly, truly one where listeners could actually say, "Hey, I could see myself as some in this guy from this guy's shoes," and just learn from your story, man.
Sure. A couple of key takeaways. Go as far as you can with figuring out your life. Then seek professional medical help. Protect a practitioner that has really good therapy skills. But don't just pick any therapist. Go in with questions. Find out what they're about and see if it's a good fit for you because you're about to open up your life and you want to make sure you're in good hands. The second thing is accept help from others because that's where your mentoring is going to come. That's where you're going to grow. Don't be afraid to talk about your feelings. If somebody starts using that against you, walk away from them. You don't need vitriolic or negative people in your life. There's billions of people on this planet. You can find plenty of friends. Take a piece of paper, blank piece of paper, and write down how you want your life to look and keep at it. Don't wait for it to happen. If you don't dial a phone, it's not going to ring. If you don't send an email, it's not going to come back. You got to pick up the phone. You got to keep making contacts. You got to work really hard and don't get ahead of yourself. Don't get the attitude that, well, I did this, now I should be the CEO. Keep working towards one step at a time and set your boundaries, which we talked about. Um, and above all else, be proud of who you are. If you're feeling low and you're feeling depressed, it's okay. Understand that you're having a bad day and depression's there. Sometimes I turn to my wife, she goes, "What's going on?" I said, "My turn in the barrel. I have no understanding of why, but I just feel like crap and I'm going to sit with it." And I don't try to like, "Oh, well, I think I'll just be happy." I try to look at it and say, "What's wrong? What did I go to bed with that I woke up that my head's doing this to me?" And sometimes it comes to me, other times it doesn't. The next day when I wake up, I look around and I say, "Okay, I'm over it." So I'm not going through a depression. What I went through is a really crappy day. And you need to define those differences. Um, Set a goal for your recovery and work towards it.
Absolutely, man. So, John, if anybody wanted to book you on their podcast, call you for a speaking engagement, how can they get a hold of you?
Either through my website, which you've been showing, or johncallasofficial at gmail.com. Um, I'm all over the internet. It's really hard not to find me.
Absolutely, man. Thank you so much, John, for coming on here and sharing your story, being transparent, being vulnerable, but truly, truly championing who you are and being totally, truly authentic, man. You could have, weathered around some of the topics in the stories, but you did not, man. And I really appreciate that because some from listening to some of our listeners and their feedback, they need some of this information, especially coming from a men's point of view. So I truly appreciate you for coming on the show, man.
Thank you for having me, and I hope your audience got value out of it. And please reach out if you're in need of anything. I'm happy to be there for you.
Absolutely. Guys, if you like this episode, make sure you leave a comment. But without anything else, make sure you share this, like it to a family or friend, as we know that this can make an impact in their lives. Until next time, God bless.
Can't complain at all. Couple dollars in my pocket, no income and go. Been working on my body, getting healthier. Thank God for clarity.